Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Shaman Podcast. I am your host, Alex Lipton, and this is the long-awaited podcast I've been waiting to do for quite some time now since the last one. I guess it's been maybe 3 or 4 weeks since the last podcast. A lot has been going on in the world, and the subject matter I'd like to get into here is kind of a broad topic, but also has some specific points I want to hit. The broad topic here I would like to discuss is mentalism, the idea of psychic barriers, and the specific issue I would like to relate this to is the candidacy for President of the United States by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. We're going to have an interesting talk today in sharing my opinions on why mentalism, the study of mentalism, psychology, the subconscious mind, how that has affected the way that people are receiving this notion of somebody such as Robert F. Kennedy Jr. running for president. At least the way that I've heard people's reactions to him and what his message is all about. But before we do that, I would like to just thank everybody that subscribes to this channel. And if you aren't subscribed, I recommend you just click that subscribe button, like this video if you're interested. Also, I would like to start this off with a prayer for forgiveness, compassion, and gratitude for all of the things that we take for granted as human beings. The air that we breathe, the water and food that we eat, the ground that we walk on, the breath that we take in. All of these things that ultimately unite all of us as human beings into a greater community of wholeness, of unity. We live in such a divisive time that, in my opinion, is not because of anything natural. It has everything to do with the propaganda, the propagation of this idea that we're all separate from each other. We're defining ourselves by the things that separate us rather than coming together over the things that unite us. And as time moves, as the sensation of time moving forward and accelerating as it does, it is becoming more and more obvious that the vast majority of people, especially in this country, have more in common than that divides us. And I would like to address some of these issues in this podcast and really just from me to you, from myself to the larger community of human beings as a whole, I would like to extend an invitation to look inward and ask yourself, what are the things that unite us all? We really need to do this right now. We need to be this, embody this, because the world is pushing us into a place where it almost seems like we're at a crossroads or a focus point or a choice point in our lives. Do we continue along the way that we've been going, or do we change our viewpoint and actually heal? Because that's really what's going on here. And sometimes people will say often that we need to change the world, or we need to change the future and head in a different direction. But as if it doesn't exist and we need to create it and work hard and put effort in to make this new world. I would argue that the world already exists. This new, more exciting, healthy, unified world already exists. We just have to change our perception of it. We need to change the frequency of our thinking. And when we do that, we're already there. There's a friend of mine years ago said this thing that we are enlightened enough. And I think this is important. One of my favorite people, a doctor of mine, Dr. Patricia Wynne Jones, says that we are already whole. We are already complete. We are inherently fulfilled as who we are. We just don't realize it. And a lot of spiritual teachers and speakers in the world will say that we need to get out of our own way. And that is, I think, a big theme going forward in a lot of these podcasts and a lot of the discussions happening around the world right now, is that we're realizing that we have kind of become our own worst enemy, and we as a whole. A lot of times we're pointing our fingers out at individuals or groups or other people outside of ourselves, saying that, oh, well, that's the problem. Oh, well, that's the issue. Even in a health situation with someone who has cancer, you can look at a tumor and be like, oh, this tumor or this cancer is the problem. The cells are making stupid decisions. And if we could just get rid of these cells, cut these destructive cells out of the system, then we'll be healed. And a lot of times it's necessary to remove certain cells that are propagating this horrible state of disease. But the question is, does this actually heal the problem that we need to address, or is it just dealing with a symptom of the problem? That I think it's the latter. We're dealing with the symptom of the problem. So again, when we're looking outside of ourselves for things or people or individuals or systems that are the problem, we got to take a step back and walk inward a little bit and recognize that all of these things are reflections of stuff that's going on within ourselves. I've discussed this a lot in previous podcasts, but if we need to recognize that we're all in this together, and that instead of trying to change people or things around us, we need to kind of go into this mode of acceptance that these are part of ourselves. The best way to heal the world is to heal yourself. I've been often saying for the last couple of years now that the best form of activism is to learn how to take care of yourself. Not just physically, which is super important. Physically, we need to heal. We're being toxified on such a grand generational scale that it's I mean, if we're not being mindful, at the very least, we should be being much more careful about what we're consuming. But if we learn to heal ourselves, trusting that it's going to radiate and reflect outward, and other people are going to receive and respond and react to that, that's actually a much more active form of activism. That's much more personal than like going out there with a sign and trying to change other people's thoughts and change other people's opinions. Because oftentimes people are very opinionated. I know I am. That once you have your mind made up, there's really not much room for changing that. People are kind of divided into these camps and identify with these camps and identify with certain cults of personality. But really, we need to let go of all that. And one of the things I took some notes this time that I want to try to get to, and we'll go deeper into it. But there are these stages of death that happen when often people are diagnosed with a terminal illness. You're gonna die in this amount of time, and there are stages of moving from denial into acceptance. And at large here, our civilization is an unsustainable one, and as a population, we're going through this process right now. Some people are in complete denial about the terminal illness that our civilization has been given. We only have a very short amount of time to get things turned around before we are forced to turn things around. And I know in America, and maybe at the world, for thousands of years, people don't really change unless they are forced to change. But we have this really great opportunity right now to change upon our own free will without having to be pushed off the edge. If you're standing on the edge of that cliff, you have a great moment to jump off into the ocean below. It's a big drop, but you can do it yourself. But it almost seems like the walls are closing in, to use that CIA propaganda corporate media term. The walls are closing in. And so it's either you're going to jump on your own or you're going to be pushed off the cliff. And that's kind of where we're at right now. And a lot of people are experiencing this. A lot of people are being pushed off the cliff due to economic circumstances, due to health circumstances. And this is really what the apocalypse is all about. The apocalypse is not the end of the world. You got to look at it as the lifting of the veil. It's the dissolving of a boundary or a barrier that allows us to see what is really going on, to see what's really there. This is a lot of people are going through this right now, and we ought to embrace it. We ought to embrace it because there's a great opportunity in this crisis. Crisis and opportunity are the same thing. And if we change our perspective of it, the thing itself actually changes. That's what quantum physics is all about. The observation of a situation actually can affect the situation. So there's a subjective experience and objective reality. And for a long time, we've been put into this position to have to choose which one is more important. Which camp are you in? Subjective experience being your religious world and how you feel makes a difference. And objective situation is like the science, traditional science point of view of, your feelings don't matter. And it's really just like, look at it for what it is, what you can see and perceive. That's all that matters. But here we go again. We're putting these two seemingly opposite polarities together, recognizing the whole in this situation. The loop, or the figure 8, the infinity symbol as a mantra or a meme to apply to this, is that when you change your subjective experience and you own your subjective experience, the story that you tell yourself, when you start to own your story, you can actually change the outcome of the story itself. You're not a victim of the story, but the story does influence you, and you influence the story. So this is the concept of the never ending story. This is one of my favorite movies, by the way. Old movie. Check it out if you haven't seen it. But it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, ladies and gentlemen. So there's some other subjects I would like to get into here, especially when it comes to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., ladies and gentlemen. As of right now, this is the guy that I think would be a great president. But also, I'm being very careful in managing my expectations at this point in my life. I'm 35 years old, been through several presidential elections, and have definitely had my hopes up and then robbed from me, and then become, there's a slippery slope here, becoming jaded into the system of just seeing that, well, maybe this isn't a democracy. Maybe the democracy hasn't been around for a long time. People say, oh, democracy's under threat. The Democrats and the Republicans, and this framework of one side versus the other, and democracy, is totally like out of nowhere. Trump is the reason democracy sucks now. But, is it? Have we had a democracy in this country, or have we had something more along the lines of a oligarchy, a corporate style oligarchy where the leaders are not elected, they are appointed, they are chosen? The two options that we are always given are not necessarily the best options, or something that we even chose. Who's really choosing this? And, if money says anything, if you follow the money, you realize that, the more money you have, you can actually determine the course of the future of a situation. So the question is between the two seemingly opposite sides, what is the third hidden option that's funding both sides of this operation, that no matter who you choose in that scenario, they win? It's kind of like if you're in a war. This has happened a lot over the centuries, but there are groups of people that will fund both sides of a conflict, of a war, and whoever wins, the third hidden party wins. To the common people, that might be a big choice and a big victory, but the question is, are we making differences and changing our course depending on our choices, or are we just continually authorizing ourselves to be moving forward on a continuous path that is outside of our current awareness? So this is how I feel like when it comes to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. It's really great to see somebody that I personally resonate with a lot on a lot of issues. I don't agree with him on everything, but at the same time, when you start to see that the establishment narrative on both sides, I'll always do both sides in air quotes because there really isn't no both sides, but the establishment on the left and the establishment on the right are both trying to ignore this guy, act as if he doesn't exist, slander him, not even act like he exists. This is an indication to me that maybe this guy actually has something going on. And back to what I was saying before, that there is more in common amongst Americans now than there ever has been. And this has a lot to do with the economic system that over the last century, really, the middle class has been destroyed, has been eroded completely, where virtually everybody is dealing with the same issues of not being able to put food on the table, the fact that their voices aren't heard. There's a very strong distrust for the media, for the corporate legacy media, and for the government itself. And of course, there's always going to be the issues that divide us and that we'll never really agree on. But at this point right now, I think it's really important to unite the country and to try to see who the real enemy is in this situation, which, in my opinion, is the corporate oligarchy. It's these unelected officials, corporate overlords that have been committing this thing, which Dr. Stephen Greer of the Disclosure Project refers to as a planetocide. Instead of genocide, eliminating a group of people, we're talking about eliminating and destroying nature itself. Now, I want to point out here that even though there's this thing called planetocide, like implying that we're gonna kill the planet, and that's a very strong meme in the climate change movement, in the politics movement, where like the whole thing, it's like we're gonna kill the planet, but the planet will be fine. George Carlin actually was the one that said, no, the planet will be fine. We don't have to save the planet. It's us that needs to change. The nature will regrow. Like everything comes from the field of energy. So look at a really good example of how nature regrows, even in the most unlikely of circumstances at Chernobyl in Russia, where this nuclear reactor exploded or melted down and caused a massive problem with the environment, and it was considered to be an exclusion zone. Like humans can't really go there for like 30,000 years or some crazy shit like that. But if you look at Chernobyl now, since humans have been removed from the situation, nature has regrown. Animals are flooding back into that place. It looks, I mean, to get the image into your head too of you've got a path, you've got the nature and the woods and human beings laying a concrete path through nature. It takes a lot of effort to put that concrete there. But within a relatively short amount of time, if you don't maintain that structure of concrete, nature will start to grow. A little blade of grass can actually cause the concrete to crack over a longer period of time. You can really only see it in time lapse. If you see a little crack in the sidewalk and some grass is growing up, you can always refill the crack or, rip out the grass. It seems like the concrete's stronger, but when you look at it in time lapse photography, that concrete stands no chance whatsoever. So anyway, the point is that Earth itself doesn't mean that even though our relationship to nature is so fucked right now, it doesn't mean that we should be bearing this this fear and this ominous sensation of like, oh my God, we're going to kill the planet. No, the planet can survive without us. It's us who need the planet. We need to change our ways. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is literally the only one in the lineup right now, people running for president, that is actively working to end pollution, bring back some sort of healthy relationship with Mother Nature, taking care of the air, taking care of the water. And another great thing about Bobby Kennedy is that instead of like looking at this in a framework of climate change, which is often politicized, not to deny or accept that climate change is real. That's not the point. The point is that climate change is so politicized that you're either on one side or the other oftentimes with this. And then what ends up happening is that nothing gets fixed, but way Bobby is putting it is it's environmentalism. It's actually taking care of the air, taking care of the water, getting rid of the pollution. Everyone wants their children and their grandchildren, and even ourselves, of course, to live in a healthy environment. You don't want to go outside and be breathing in toxic fumes all the time. And guess what? Both sides of the so-called argument would absolutely agree in that. And that's why one of the great things Bobby represents is that he is talking about bringing the country together, recognizing those common issues that bring us together. Let's recognize the common enemy here, which is the corporate greed, corporate corruption, shadow government, things happening outside of the rule of law. Bobby Kennedy is a lawyer, an environmental lawyer. He has waged lawsuits and won so many times against some of the biggest, most monumental corporations in the world, like Monsanto, the FDA, the EPA. Anybody that's gone out of their way to exploit nature, this guy has been there to represent those forces and those people. That was the original reason I voted. Like, I voted for Joe Biden, and I did it not because I was so freaked out about Donald Trump. I know that's a big reason why a lot of people voted for Joe Biden, was because they were afraid of Donald Trump and they didn't want him to be president. But to me, I mean, if you look at the facts, if you listen to the policy, regardless of the rhetoric, if you look at the policy, the stuff that Joe Biden policy, the Biden administration, or the Democratic Party, DNC establishment party policy is all about, it's the same exact thing for the most part as what the so-called right-wing people are. So policy wasn't going to change. It was just putting a different face on the corporation of America. I voted for Joe Biden because naively I thought that the Democratic Party would be more in alignment with helping protect the environment and making sure that we live in a clean, healthy place. I was wrong. I was wrong, as so many people were, and whether you want to see that or not, that is my opinion, and it is based on facts. I mean, we are still toxifying the environment on a mass scale, and all the things like the military-industrial complex, which is poisoning the environment as well. Both sides of this argument, the DNC and the RNC, are both advocating for more war, more money into the military-industrial complex. So it's, again, another reason why I love Bobby Kennedy's platform so far is that he's not only talking about helping the environment, he's been doing it for years. He's been actively trying to help the environment, and he's succeeded. The Hudson River in New York was a toxic cesspool, and Bobby Kennedy Jr. went in there and represented legally all of these people and organizations that were working to get rid of the pollution of this place. And within a short amount of time, thanks to his litigation and his successful lawsuits, the Hudson River is a lot cleaner than it used to be. Not perfect, but it is a lot cleaner. So I think it's a glimpse of hope to see somebody like that running for president, and also the idea that both sides of the establishment don't like him because he threatens their gravy train, their money operation. And so there's so much, it's like every time I sit down to do a podcast, I always make a mental note to myself, like, I got so much to say and I want to get back into doing this much more often. I know, but then I get off the show and I want to spend time focusing and like outlining what is it to talk about. But there's so much, it's so interconnected. There's so much going on right now that is extremely relevant to this whole theme about uniting with each other as human beings, as a country, the so-called both sides coming together with a real common threat. The common threat is our extinction. The corporations that are operating in this world today have done a really good job over the last several decades to obfuscate, distract, and downplay and confuse the direness of the way that we treat the environment. Now, if you want to look at this in a much more personal metaphor way, you have a house, you have a small living quarters, there's a place to go to the bathroom. You flush the toilet, it goes out of your house. But if you were to start shitting everywhere in your house, pissing everywhere in your house is going to start to reek. It's going to start to get infected. It's just the bacteria is going to get really bad. It's going to become unlivable in that house. And the longer you do that without cleaning it up, the bigger the cleaning operation is going to be. And if you really go a long way, that house could very well get condemned and you have to tear it down. That's the situation we're talking about right now. And so Bobby Kennedy Jr. is a really important individual to listen to. And I want to get into the broader subject of this podcast in context of Bobby Kennedy, which is psychic barriers, mentalism, the psychology. When you see Bobby Kennedy, or when I see Bobby Kennedy go on podcasts or on independent media, who are really the only people having him at this point, even still the independent media, there are some individuals that, when it comes to controversial subjects such as COVID policy, vaccine mandates, lockdowns, the efficacy and safety of vaccines, then people have what I would consider to be a psychic barrier. Now, the question is what is a psychic barrier? How do they work? How does the mind work? And is there a way to recognize these within ourselves and ask ourselves, is this really my opinion about something, a given issue, or is this an opinion that has been seeded within me by outside forces that I am defending? This is where we're going to get into mentalism. Mentalism is a field of magic. I'm talking not about like witchcraft magic or occult sciences or mystical stuff. I'm talking about like card tricks, sleight of hand, illusion, performance illusion magic. Mentalism is a subset of magic, and I've been doing card tricks for years, since I was like in 5th grade. And it's always been a wonderful learning lesson and experience to do something for somebody, make a card appear out of nowhere, pick a random card, and then I find your card, and just a look of surprise and amazement on somebody's face. How did you do that? Because to the observer in a magic trick, it really appears like you're defying physics. You're defying all sense of reason and rationality. You're doing something completely, seemingly impossible. But I'll tell you, as a magician, and I'm sure as anyone could in this world would, accept, that there is some sort of trick to it. There is this thing called sleight of hand. There is this thing called suspension of disbelief, where you are brought into the story of what the magician is telling you while they are showing you things. And in reality, there's that proverbial, here, look over here at this hand, and when I do this with my hand, while they're getting you to look at the hand over here, they're moving cards around over here. They're doing little sneaky things down here that you're just not looking at. So magic itself, magic tricks, is really all about where you're putting your attention and the skill of the performer or the magician to distract your attention and manipulate your perceptions without your awareness. So there's a great video that I want to share with you that perfectly demonstrates what I'm talking about here when it comes to how powerful it is when we are guided with our perception to put attention on something, and how we can think we're seeing everything, but in reality we're missing something so unbelievably profound that when you go back and see it, you're like, what? So here, take a look at this video real quick. So what's crazy about this video is how, under a very simple suggestion to count how many times the ball is passed, you are focused in this barrage of basketballs being passed from multiple people. You think it's like, okay, this is the challenge here. I got to find the basketball. But then when they come back with the question, did you see the moonwalking bear? You're like, what the fuck? Like, what moonwalking bear? You go back and watch the exact same video, and right in front of your face, there's this guy dressed up like a bear, just like moonwalking through the middle of the thing. And then you almost have to, like, you don't believe it at first. There's that denial. Like, no, wait a minute. That's got to be a second video, different video. You go back and watch the same exact video, and it's right there in front of your face. But that is what mentalism is. It's a part of it is about when you're paying attention to one thing, you're missing out on other things. This is a big lesson when it comes to mentalism. Some people think mentalism is like, gets convoluted with the quantum physics and new age ideas of mind over matter, like mentalism, like mind, the power of the mind. There are some very famous mentalists in the world. One of my favorites, his name is Darren Brown. There's another guy, I think his name is Gerald Senehi. These are people that will do seemingly impossible things, like bending a spoon with their mind. Or, in another really good example of mentalism, a mentalist will tell you, they show up to your house. They've never been there before. They have a conversation with you, and they say, I'm gonna show you the power of the mind. You can let's go over to the bookshelf here. The mentalist will say, I want you to pick out a random book off the shelf. So then what you're going to do is have this sensation of free will, free choice. I'm going to pick a book. It's not going to be the book the other person picks. And there's no way, this is an assumption that's made, there's no way that the mentalist, the performer, has any idea which book I'm going to pick. So you pick a random book off the shelf. This is the first step in the delusion or the illusion, the deception. Because guess what? That was not a random book that you picked off the shelf. Well, how could this mentalist, in just meeting me and just coming to mass for the first time, get me to pick a book that he wanted me to pick and not one that I wanted to pick? Well, this is the psychology of mentalism. There are so many subtle cues and ways that a mentalist, a skilled mentalist, can influence you to pick the book that they want you to pick without your awareness. This is the key thing of mentalism, is that it's not mind over matter or some, like, you know, anything broadly like scientific, like physics like that. It's really psychology. Mentalism is the skill and ability of somebody to put ideas into your head without your awareness, so that when you start thinking things, thinking that you're thinking these things, these are not the things that you thought up. These were the things that were programmed into you to think. So if that makes sense, just to make it another analogy here, is that I'm going to give you a choice. You pick this one or you pick that one. And you think, okay, I'm going to pick that one. Both of those options were suggested to you in a way to guide you subconsciously to pick a particular option. So this applies very much to advertising, marketing. There's some really great examples of this on YouTube. You could check out Darren Brown. Darren Brown has video upon video on this idea, and he actually goes into a really interesting expose of the early 20th century, late 19th century seances and mediums and these clairvoyant people that would have a big gathering of people in an audience, and then they would seemingly read your mind or commune with the dead. Like, how did that person know? I never told anybody this thing, and this guy on stage knew it. A lot of these early seances and occult people that would, there's one of his, Alexander, the great Alexander, the man who knows, even like the Wizard of Oz, like this whole mentality, these people that could read your mind, and they have some sort of special like shaman skill that they can like tap into the spirit realm. Well, in fact, one of the most famous magicians of all time, Harry Houdini, he went on a campaign against these people because his mother passed away. And at the time, there were all these so-called psychics and spiritual people that were like communing with the dead. So Harry Houdini, being a very skilled magician, sleight of hand, understanding mentalism, he went through and was able to debunk all of these people. It was like Harry Houdini became the ultimate enemy of people claiming to be psychics or clairvoyants. And a lot of magicians of the like of Harry Houdini, Penn and Teller, and most magicians will be very atheistic. They don't believe in God. They don't believe in spirits. They don't believe in anything like truly like mystical, magical. They are magicians, but they don't believe in like the traditions of old magic. They see it all as psychology and mental manipulation. I don't personally agree with that. I think that there actually is a spirit realm. We are spirits. There is an afterlife. There is a God or a sense of spiritual higher purpose. I believe that. But I also believe that there is psychological techniques. And I think maybe even a lot of these mentalists or these seance people back in the day, they might have actually believed in their own being that they had some sort of special ability. But really, they just are really skilled at reading people, reading all the subtle cues to understand people without them understanding how much they know themselves. Like a lot of these mentalists can know somebody better than they know themselves because they understand, you know, the placement of your eyes makes a difference, gives you an indication of what they're thinking. How you talk to somebody and use certain words in certain ways can trigger responses that the mentalist can then pick up on and basically create, like deduce something about somebody just on body language alone. So this is a really interesting subject of study, mentalism and psychology. Marketing itself, advertising, since its inception at the late 19th century, early 20th century. You have people like Edward Bernays, who is the nephew of Sigmund Freud. Edward Bernays became known as the father of public relations, but he considered himself to be a propagandist. And what he did was he understood that there was a psychology, especially being Freud's nephew. He was able to like look at psychology and psychoanalysis and apply it to business and how to sell products. Instead of selling you things that you need, he started to understand that you could put things into people's perception of things they wanted that they didn't need. You can create wants out of nothing. I mean, there are very specific sets of needs that are kind of limited. Everyone has them. These are the common things. But then, like, what do you want? Oh, well, that could be anything. So creating wants or desires in the people's minds that were not initially there, then you can sell them things that they wanted but didn't need. This is the whole idea that we're dealing with still today of materialism and buying all this shit. No matter how, there's that thing, if you buy, like, no matter how much you keep buying the next iPhone or the next whatever advanced technology, you might have a little rush of fulfillment, but then you still feel empty on the inside. No matter how much you try to fill that hole, there's always it's just gonna keep, you're not addressing the real problem. So one of the things that Edward Bernays learned about when it comes to psychology, and by extension mentalism is a big part of, is the idea that an individual and their belief systems and what they need and what they want and how they respond to the environment, an individual, is completely different than how a group of people think. So being able to fool an individual versus being able to fool a group of people are two completely different things. And I'll tell you the truth here, it's a lot, and this is what Edward Bernays knew and he figured out, was that it's a lot easier to manipulate a population, manipulate their beliefs and their attitudes and what they want, than it is to influence an individual. There's a great line in the movie Men in Black after Tommy Lee Jones shows Will Smith the reality, the truth, which, by the way, is kind of becoming more and more true as the days go on here. More on that later. That aliens are real, that extraterrestrials have been visiting this planet for a long time. There's a shadow government organization that's been working with these extraterrestrials, reverse engineering the technology, and it's all real. So Tommy Lee Jones shows him the truth about all this stuff, and Will Smith, his mind is blown, of course, and he says to Tommy Lee Jones, like, why don't you tell people what's going on? People are smart. If you told people the truth, why are you lying? If you told people the truth, they would be able to handle this truth about extraterrestrials. And Tommy Lee Jones says, well, the person is smart, the person is intelligent, but people are dumb, vulnerable, easily manipulated, and highly suggestible. It was right in the movie Men in Black. And this is what has been going on for a very, very long time. And I think as it's definitely not part of the general education in America or around the world about the nature of psychology in this particular way, that there's a really strong difference between the way an individual thinks and the way a group thinks. Like the idea that a group thinks, that's kind of an exclusive piece of knowledge that has been left to the marketing, advertising, elite, corporate elite. They use this as a weapon to manipulate people's perceptions. Great example of this. Cigarettes, smoking. Edward Bernays actually was a huge part of this. Edward Bernays, go look into the history of this guy, single-handedly was able to get women who, up until this point, it was a taboo for women to smoke in public or smoke at all. Bernays was able to use marketing, advertisement, and public opinion to overnight get women to smoke. Like, look up the story. I don't need to tell you the whole thing, but essentially the women's suffrage movement was going on, and at this big parade, Edward Bernays arranged it so that right at the point in the parade where all the photos were going to be taken, the women were all to stop, all wearing the same color as the Lucky Strike cigarettes, by the way. They were to all stop, lift up their skirt where they had cigarettes in their garter. They pull out the cigarettes and all light up a cigarette at the same time. So in the minds of the population, when all the photographs went off, was that women's suffrage, women's liberation is psychologically associated with smoking cigarettes. So smoking cigarettes suddenly became sexy. Cigarettes became the symbol of liberation in the minds of the people. There's no logic behind that. Cigarettes are harmful and they are dangerous and they are addictive, but that was irrelevant to the psychology, because when you start to understand that you can influence people's behavior subconsciously, it can defy all reason. You can start doing completely irrational things as long as there is an association, an emotional association in the mind. Edward Bernays put all of this together. And another scary fact about Edward Bernays, if you understand anything about history of World War II and the Nazi propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, the minister of propaganda for the Nazis, he attributed all of his knowledge and learning to Edward Bernays. Goebbels, as like when we think propaganda, we think of like fascism and these horrible places that are like showing you a bunch of bullshit, getting you to believe stuff that's not true. That's what we're talking about here. But what we fail to recognize is that Edward Bernays, an American, was the guy that laid the foundation for all that. And another part of the thing we need to recognize, and the illusion we need to wake up from now, is that propaganda never ended. They just changed the name of it. It's called public relations now. It's called marketing. It's called advertising. You know, Coca-Cola, one of the biggest companies on earth, is one of the most toxic drinks for anybody to be drinking on a long-term basis. The amount of sugar and the highly processed nature of it doesn't matter, because it has certain associations in our mind that have been generationally propagated to us. So this is just a little brief history into mentalism, the power of psychology, emotion, how easily we can be manipulated, especially if we don't understand the science behind the psychology of this. So this is really comes back into the idea of psychic barriers when it comes to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., one of the main points that the media, even a lot of individuals, will always throw out as a way to discredit, slander, and smear him and just kind of be like, well, you know, we're not going to take you seriously, is the idea that vaccines are correlated, the advent of vaccines since 1989, with like up to 72 vaccines per child, has a correlation to the rise in autism. So they always say this as like the science disproved that. So here you're saying you're spreading misinformation. But what I love that Bobby does is he always says, well, show me where I'm wrong. I'm not so opinionated about it that I'm going to ignore science. If you could show me scientific papers that disprove what I'm saying, then I'll change my mind. But the thing is, most people that ask him that question have no intention of doing any of the research themselves. They have no intention of talking about it, really. They just kind of throw it at him being like, you're wrong here, case closed. Bobby Kennedy was on Joe Rogan's podcast just recently, and I think it was the first time that he had an opportunity to really go deep into the whole story of like that statement of vaccines and autism and explain it. And when you actually listen, you start to realize maybe there is a correlation. And that's another thing too. People don't generally understand. They often get confused, the ideas of correlation and causation. This is a huge difference. Causation is cause and effect. This led to that, no questions. Correlation is that this has an influence with this, but there's other factors. It's like a very big difference. So Bobby Kennedy has never said that vaccines cause cancer. He's always, if anything, alluded to this really interesting story that there is a correlation. You can see on a graph, like these things are going up at the same time. But regardless of how you feel or think about that, that's not what I'm trying to promote here. I'm not promoting that as the idea. What I am promoting or trying to get people to think about is the idea of psychic barriers. That when you already have your mind made up, when you have a program or a thought in your head which you didn't think on your own, how many people in the vast majority of the population came to that conclusion that what he is saying is wrong because they did the research, versus how many people think that what Bobby's saying is wrong about vaccines and autism because what they were told from other people? I would say it's the latter, the vast majority of people. So I have this analogy I've been using a lot when it comes to the mind in relation to all this stuff, that you should look at the mind like a big library. And some people have way more books than others. But if you walk into a library, think of like the old Beauty and the Beast cartoon when the Beast brings Belle into this massive library and she loves to read, and there's just books upon books and on every subject. It's like, wow, I could read so much. Think of the mind like that. Everyone has this huge library of books in their minds, and some people have specialized in certain other things than others, and but what I'm thinking of getting at here with the whole idea of mentalism and the idea that we don't really realize the nature of our mind so much. A lot of people will go into the library and of their mind, and they got all these books. They have a perception, say they got a book on vaccines, for example, or let's use a less controversial subject. They've got a book on is it more less controversial to talk about pharmaceutical drugs? Let's see. Let's just go with it. Pharmaceutical drugs. They've got a book on pharmaceutical drugs. And you go and you look at the book, and it's got the title on it, and when you hold that book in your hand, in your library of your mind, that's a symbol that you know something about this. I got this whole book. Some might say the problem is that in their mind they have a sense of knowing things, but they haven't like read all the books. Like, I have this book on pharmaceutical drugs. I may not have read it, but I at least have it. I'll read it one day. I don't think that's the problem, that they haven't read in the books. I think the problem is that they haven't even opened the book. When you open the book, there'll be the title page, there'll be a table of contents, but for the vast majority of people, in the minds of the people, this is how mentalists are able to manipulate perception so well, is that in the mind, when they hold that book, imagine opening the book on the thing that you think you know. You get to the table of contents, okay, all the stuff is here, and then you open into the meat of the book, all blank pages. There's nothing there. There's a big volume, a volume on pharmaceutical drugs. And when you hold that, you're like, the knowledge is power. I have so much knowledge. Yeah, maybe I haven't read it, but I could at some point. I got this. It's the knowledge here. But when you open it up, there's really nothing in there. There's nothing in there. And that doesn't mean that pharmaceutical drugs doesn't have a book that has stuff in there. But for the vast majority of people, we have this illusion that we think we know stuff, but for the most part, we don't. We don't, because we haven't taken the time to actually research this stuff. We just kind of fill up programs. This is filling up our subconscious mind with things that we think we know, that gives us a sense of importance, of self-empowerment, of knowledge is power, but we really don't know much. We only know what we've been programmed with. Here, put this book in your library. Now you know, and that's it. And that is why I think that when most people ask Bobby Kennedy, well, you said this really controversial thing about vaccines and autism, and we know that that's not true. And he says, well, show me where I'm wrong. They can't, because even though they have that book on that issue, there's nothing in it. So they're trying to throw this book at him. But it's like he can easily grab it and look at it and be like, this is an empty book. There's nothing in here. So it's really worthwhile to start asking ourselves, how does the mind work? What is the nature of the mind? What am I missing? What am I paying attention to? And therefore, what am I not paying attention to? Another picture that you can look at that just demonstrates this is there's optical illusions. There's this old picture of depending on how you look at it, you can look at it and be like, okay, look and see, where is the young woman in this picture? And here it is. You can see the young woman. As you're looking at that young woman, I will ask you, okay, now where is the old woman in the same picture? Might take you a second. Maybe you see the old woman, but not the young woman. Point is that both the young woman and the old woman are in the exact same picture. And the fact is that the way the mind works, you are literally unable to see both the young woman and the old woman at the same time. You could try to cross your eyes and conceptually know that they're both there, but physically, when you're looking for the old woman, you see the old woman. When you're looking for the young woman, you see the young woman. You can't see both at the same time, and that's the nature of the illusion. It's just how the mind works. This is happening as we speak right now on a massive scale. So let's see here. Key thing here also to recognize is that when it comes to mentalism and this whole idea of controlling the mind, that's like the statement here. It's like even a mentalist can be really skilled at hypnotism, like a hypnotist, for example, understanding the psychology of the mind and subconscious and how to put you into a different state of brain waves and manipulate you and control your behavior. There really is no controlling people's behavior. There's only influencing people's behavior. The idea of mind control is in itself mind control, to distract you from the reality that no one's in control of your mind. Only you are in control of your mind. You are just basically highly suggestible. We are all highly suggestible and are being influenced in a very weaponized way. This is propaganda, influencing your mind to see things in a certain way. You can look at people in cults, like in my last podcast video, people thinking like, oh, they're controlled by the cult leader. But no, the cult leader had just found their vulnerabilities and exploited it and influenced them. This is a really important difference because, again, it comes back to self-empowerment. If we're all being mind controlled, then that implies that there's someone controlling our minds and that they need to be stopped and they're the bad guys, and point your finger at them. We are victimized by the controllers. And this goes into all the conspiracy theories about like a ruling elite that's controlling the world. When you go deep enough down the rabbit hole for long enough, you start to, you realize that there's something like this going on. And then you kind of come to the conclusion, back to the stages of death, really, where you deny it. Then you, what are they? Let's say it. Took some notes here. So there's the stages of death. You got denial, then you got anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. Those are the stages that we go through, I think, in my personal way as well, when it goes down, you go down the conspiracy rabbit hole in terms of this controlling elite, the controllers of the mind, the controllers of the population. Literally go through that whole point. And then once you just accept it, it's kind of like, you can accept it one of two ways. You accept it that essentially there's nothing I can do about it, or you accept it that I'm just going to stop thinking about this. I accept that maybe it exists, but I'm going to just stop paying attention to it because it's useless at this point. There are no controllers. There are only influencers. And when you go down the rabbit hole long enough, you start to realize that this is all part of the scam. This is the mentalist trick to get us to believe that we are powerless, to believe that we are victims, to believe that there's nothing we can do. And these are all beliefs. It's not true. The mentalist is able to exploit that, and then in a performance setting like Darren Brown or Gerard Senehi or any of these mentalists, it can actually be a really good teaching lesson to show you that, like, wow, like, just when you thought you understood the world, guess what? No, you don't. You don't understand the world. And that amazing sense of awe that comes in, that wonder of, wow. See, that's a good way of using mentalism. But there is also the dark side of mentalism. The idea of getting you to believe something that's so not true that essentially you become the agent of the control itself. You're not thinking critically. You're not thinking rationally. You think you know, but really you just end up becoming the police force for this propaganda that you think you believe, and you came to these conclusions, but you did not come to these conclusions. These were all books put into the library of your mind that make you think you know what's going on, but you don't. All those books are empty. So this is really like the most amazing thing about mentalism and our sensation about what's going on in the world right now. If we're going to heal, if we're going to recognize that we have a problem, and that as a whole population, or we're facing this extinction event right now. There are over 150 species dying every day on the planet, things that we don't even know exist. But due to the pollution, cutting down the rainforest, microplastics in the ocean, I mean, you cannot deny that this stuff is bad. Unless you're like in the religious mindset, the propaganda from the church that the book of Revelations is true and that Jesus is coming back and we could do whatever we want to the planet because it doesn't really matter anyway because we're all going to heaven and the bad guys are going to hell. Propaganda. But if you break free of that, or you don't accept it, thankfully, if you don't accept that, then you start to realize that the problem that we face is a problem of our own creation. And that if we first recognize the problem, it's again, that's the denial part. Then there's the anger. Oh, we're going to fight the system. We're going to resist. We're going to go up against the bad guys. But then after the anger, there's the bargaining. Well, okay, well, maybe if we do this and we'll get that, or if we try this, we'll try that, because it's so hard. And no matter how much you try to stop this problem, you're going to try to compromise. And that's kind of like what happens in politics all the time. And then after the bargaining, of course, is the depression, where you realize there's nothing you can do about it. And that is the key. That is the key. Once you realize there's nothing you can do about it, then you accept it. You accept it. That's where we need to get to right now. And once you get through all that stuff and you accept the situation, that's when you're no longer under the guise of, here, pay attention to this or pay attention to that. Once you accept that you're being manipulated, once you accept that you're being influenced, then you can start to ask, okay, well then how can I influence myself? How can I take control? Since no one's controlling me and I can't control the situation, how can I influence myself and influence things in a more positive way? It's a more gentle way of dealing with things. So anyway, this has been an interesting talk that I wanted to share with in terms of mentalism, psychic barriers. And another thing I'll point out too with the psychic barriers, especially when it comes to Bobby Kennedy and the vaccine issue, a lot of people got vaccinated. A lot of people got vaccinated. More vitally, a lot of parents got their children vaccinated. So question comes down to this. If what Bobby's saying is right, and you start to go through that process of acceptance, denial, anger, all that stuff into acceptance, and you actually accept that maybe the pharmaceutical companies were lying, maybe it's not as safe and effective as they said it is, and it could be leading to a lot of problems. Once you accept, it's like, just to get to that acceptance part, if you're a parent with a kid and you got your kid vaccinated, I can only imagine the guilt that you might feel, or the shame or the frustration that you put your child in that position because of something that you were told was true when it wasn't. I totally can sympathize with people like that would resist something that Bobby Kennedy is talking about. They don't want to hear it because that means that they would feel guilty that they fucked up, that it was their responsibility and they got swindled. And I think a lot, when you put, again, back to the individual versus the population, an individual outside of the influence of a population and propaganda could probably change their mind and accept that. But when you have a massive population of people that are all reinforcing that, man, I get it. That's a feeling I don't imagine you'd want to feel, that guilt and that shame and that sense of making a mistake when you're putting your kid's life or health in jeopardy. But that's the nature of death and acceptance, isn't it? It's not easy when you're told something that there's the death of your life or just the death of an idea, to go through that process. It's like, hey, it's not necessarily a fun process to go through. So I sympathize with everybody, and I encourage anybody that seems to be taking sides on this situation to try to put yourself in the shoes of the people that seem to be on the other side of your situation and try to see it from their perspective. Because in a holographic universe, in this consciousness realm, we are all one. So if I was born as you and went through all of your life, I wouldn't be doing things what I would want to do. I would be doing what you were doing. So essentially, I am another you, and you are another me. We have to do some mental gymnastics to get through this, but ultimately, that's one of the biggest learning lessons I would try to get people to take away from this, is to put yourself in the shoes of the people that you disagree with the most and ask yourself, how do I feel when I'm in this situation? That is one of the things I love about Bobby Kennedy, is he's reaching out to all sides to recognize that exact purpose, that we're all in this together, and the problems that we face are much more universal than we think they are. And anyone out there that's trying to appeal to our anger, to appeal to our tribalism, get us to see each other as the enemy. Those forces are the actual enemy, and it's not even individuals. It's just the systems. It's the programming of groups of people. Back to Edward Bernays, we need to change the way that the group thinks, and the only way to do that is not change the group. This is the counterintuitive part. To change the group, you don't change the group. You change yourself, and then when you live in that conviction, more and more, just trust. You have to trust. It's like that leap of faith. When you take care of yourself and heal yourself, trust that other people are going to do it too. It's the difference between power and force. So, well, didn't really have a chance to get into the whole alien subject that much, and maybe I'll leave that to another episode. But that is a very interesting subject as well, with what's going on in the world right now. As all this stuff is happening, again, just maybe foreshadow and link in all this other stuff we've been talking about here. The real enemy. The real enemy is the secrecy about this issue of extraterrestrials, and more importantly, the reverse engineering of the technology. We don't have to change the world. The world will change when we change ourselves. When we change our relationship to each other and we change our relationship to nature, then things will heal much more rapidly than if we tried to change the world itself or fight the system. Don't fight the system. Put yourself in the system's shoes and ask yourself, how did the system come to be? And then go in yourself and reflect and see how is this happening within myself at this point. There is a purpose to the illusion, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm really excited to be here right now. And simultaneously, I am terrified beyond measure, because it's just a paradox of the world that we live in. Everything is very unpredictable right now. We're in a soup of chaos. Chaos not in the scary sense, but chaos in the sense of you can't understand a pattern. There's no pattern recognition. But I take that back. I think there is a pattern. There is a pattern, but it's not within our framework of history. The pattern is much larger, and what's happening right now on this planet with the population and our relationship to each other and nature is absolutely connected and reflected by what happened 10 to 15,000 years ago during the time of the lost civilization of what people call Atlantis or Lemuria or Mu, Tartaria, whatever you want to call it. This like lost world that is mythological at this point. When we start to ask ourselves, are these myths not real, or have we just forgotten and so distanced ourselves through time and memory of it that it only seems like a myth? What if we are a mythical situation or a mythical civilization right now? That is really like one of the cool things I like to think about, and also just gives a little bit of a perspective that we're not just going to be growing and growing and getting better and better and better over time. If you look at the past, we've been at high places in civilization, and then we have fallen, and we got back to high civilization. So we didn't just start primitive and get more advanced. It's a lot longer legacy of ups and downs. And when we go back to what happened during the time of the lost civilization, the great flood of the Younger Dryas and all of that, there's a lot of connections to what's happening right now. So how do we learn from a culture or an episode in history that we don't even remember? That's what they say. And I'll leave it at this. If we're going to learn from the history so we don't repeat the mistakes of the past, and we don't remember the past, how are we expected to learn at all? So this is the beautiful thing that we have right now, right? It's scary, but it's also beautiful. And I am very grateful to, if you've shared this time up to this place, thank you so much. And I really appreciate you being here. And we'll have this clips up on TikTok and Instagram and blah, 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 and all that stuff. So like and subscribe. Thank you for following. And next time, let's talk much more deeply about the extraterrestrial issue. Thank you so much. Take care.